everybody, I hope you're all doing very well. I hope you all had a fantastic New Year's Eve and you celebrated 2016, and hopefully this year is going to be bigger and better than ever. And so yeah, this is going to be my first review for the new year. So I uploaded a few reviews that I did in the past, but you know, they have been officially my first reviews for 2016, but this one is going to be the proper 2016 film review, so hopefully you enjoy it. So today I have a film from Norway. This is an action disaster movie spoken in the Norwegian language, released in the year 2015, directed by Fjord, and this movie is called The Wave. So The Wave is based in the Norwegian mountainside of the Fjord. Now the Fjord is this beautiful scenic sort of place in Norway where it's kind of like a coastal town. There's a big lake, and I'm not terribly familiar with this place, but it is an absolute paradise. So it's a tourist attraction. You've got all these beautiful mountains, but then there's always the possibility of a landslide, basically these mountains collapsing and splashing into the water, which is ultimately going to create a mega tsunami. So this is always the threat, and they've got certain precautions in place in order to prevent it. It will at least get an insight into when it's going to happen so people can get away. So this guy, played by Fjord, he works in this area that is supposed to keep tabs on this mountain, and he starts to suspect that something is very strange, that the mountain is behaving very strangely, and that there could be a possibility of a collapse, and it's going to put everyone in danger. But there's no sort of sufficient evidence to provide to his co-workers in order to set off a warning. So he's fighting against time because he knows it's going to happen, but he just can't quite convince the others that it's going to happen. And whether or not he can before it's all too late and this mountain is going to collapse and create this massive tidal wave, then that's something you're going to have to find out for yourself, because that's as far as I'm going with my synopsis. Now my thoughts on The Wave. This movie, it is a very generic film. It is a very disaster-like film. I actually thought that this is definitely a Norwegian version of something like Dante's Peak, which is a Pierce Brosnan film, which I absolutely loved. Dante's Peak. I just thought the special effects were so fantastic. But it does run a very a generic sort of formula, in that you've got this one guy who is this expert who says that something really bad is going to happen. The town don't believe it, and that until the very last minute they start to believe it, but it's all too late and carnage ensues. So I really got the feeling of Dante's Peak in this film. Although it is a tidal wave, I still had that sort of reminiscent quality of this guy who is trying to convince the townspeople that something really bad is going to happen. His co-workers don't want this because it's going to be a disaster for the tourism industry, and then it just sets itself up for these people to be in peril, and that if they believed his warnings early on and then everyone got out, there wouldn't be a movie. So I thought that the plot device was very convenient for the overall story and to put them in that perilous situation. So I would have liked this film to be a little bit more creative. As I said, you got Fjord, who was definitely a Pierce Brosnan sort of character. He's a likeable guy, but none of these characters really go into any depth. It's all about the special effects, it's all about the carnage. So it does play out, and then when the tragedy hits, then the guy goes back to look for, survivors and all that kind of thing. And because of that, it does become very predictable, and you know how this movie is going to unfold. So that was my biggest disappointment with The Wave. But having said that, although it is generic, although it is very predictable and a very sort of Hollywood-esque sort of film, I still really enjoyed it, because what it does very, very well. I thought the intense build-up was very slow, but you know that something is a little bit off, just the same with Dante's Peak. But it was the way that they handled the tidal wave, which is something I really, really enjoyed. I'm not going to tell you what happens, but you don't actually get an insight into the wave. When it actually happens, you don't actually see it straight away. You get the anticipation that it's coming, and it's coming very quickly, and when everyone is trying to run away, you could sense the panic, you could sense just the sheer desperation to get up into the higher levels and the higher safety, and you could feel the panic, you could feel the suspense, you could feel the adrenaline. I thought Fjord, he really utilised that moment of suspense, that moment of not seeing this tidal wave, but knowing it's coming, and that you have to rush, it just got the blood pumping, and I thought that it was really, really well handled. And it is a sign that this guy is very good at action. He directed one of the Coldplay films. He also directed another movie called Escape, which is a fantastic sort of cat and mouse film. And so he really understands action. I thought he built up the suspense of that tidal wave perfectly. And when you actually see the tidal wave coming through, I just thought, it's just like you're anticipating something really bad happening, and then all of a sudden you see it and you think to yourself, uh-oh. And it's just that level of horror that I thought Fjord really captured. Now the cinematography was absolutely breathtaking. This part of Norway is beautiful. It is an absolute paradise, and so if you are a fan of cinematography, you're really going to like The Wave. I thought it is a very high budget film, and it shows, because it is absolutely beautiful to look at. So as far as scenery is concerned, it was fantastic. As far as the anticipation, the build up, the suspense, it was absolutely fantastic. There were some scenes that were very harrowing. I'm not going to tell you what happens, but there's a scene involving a bus that I thought was very dark, and so the movie does go to very dark places, but unfortunately it does prevent itself from being a great film because you've seen it in Dante's Peak. You know how the formula is going to unfold, you know what's going to happen at the end, and that does hurt it a little bit. I would have liked if Rortag would have taken it in a slightly different direction, but it feels like this is a director who was a fan of these types of films like Dante's Peak and all those other catastrophic sort of disaster films, and he's just decided to make one in the Norwegian language, and that's basically all that's different, apart from, as I said, great cinematography and really handling the set pieces masterfully well. It just feels like it is still playing it a little bit safe, and that it's trying to emulate things rather than be a body of its own. So that was my biggest problem with it. You know, the continuity is good. I really like the slow build up. The characters, not really anything to go by. As I said, very standard sort of disaster characters. It's not about the people, it's about the situation and the overall onslaught of this horrific sort of event. So it would have been better with, you know, slightly better characters, but having said that, if you are a fan of disaster films, The Wave is definitely one to look at, especially if you're a fan of Norwegian films. That are handled very, very well. Action set pieces are fantastic, but when you get fantastic action set pieces along with very predictable sort of formula, you know how it's going to unfold, so it does lessen the impact a little bit. So overall for The Wave, I really enjoyed it. I would highly recommend it to anyone out there. I'm going to give it 3 stars. Alright guys, that's it for my review. I hope you enjoyed it. Till next time, keep watching movies, and I'll see you later.